Okay, so this is another complicated set of vocabulary. I might even say this is trickier than negative reinforcement, so brace yourselves. But if you have the handout on the second page, there's sort of like a pattern that follows. When retrograde amnesia occurs, you forget things from the past. When you have retrospective memory, you remember something from the past. So retroactive interference is going to deal with old information. Whenever you see that word retro, think old. Whenever you see this word pro, you can think new or current or future. Those are the kinds of things more or recent. So I want you to still follow that same pattern when you learn about these new words. What I might first do after I draw this chart, or if you have the handout, you could put a line in between the words in the chart. I would draw an arrow to the left under retroactive interference and an arrow that moves to the right under proactive interference. Because in retroactive interference, the interference moves backwards, and in proactive interference, the interference moves forward. So in both of these, we tend to forget stuff, and so the forgetting happens forwards in proactive interference, and the forgetting happens backwards in retroactive interference. All right, so in retroactive interference, we forget the old or past information because the new stuff gets in the way. And then in proactive interference, we forget the newer or recent information because the old stuff gets in the way. So sometimes when you have an example, it makes it easier. You could pause it if you need to write those down. But for retroactive interference, think about material that we learned from the beginning of the year. You probably don't know that as well anymore because we've learned so much stuff. So we forget the old information compared to the new. Now, I even asked the class about a word from last week. What's the information processing model? And most kids forgot what we learned last week. And that's already old information compared to all the other things that have been happening. Remember the information processing model? There were 3 stages: encode, store, retrieve. Did you remember that, or did you already forget it? If you forgot it, you had retroactive interference where you just forget old stuff because there's been a lot happening. Now, an example of proactive interference would be forgetting a new password or a phone number. So, for example, maybe you keep entering your old password in, so you remember the old stuff, but the old stuff is interfering with this new password that you have to remember. So the interference or the forgetting is happening, it's forward acting. Now, a great way that I think it could also help you is just to think of what is forgotten. So you could think of it almost like the first thing you learned or the old stuff. First thing you learned or the old stuff versus the second thing you learned or the new stuff. And then so we could have that in both sections. Do that one more time. Okay, so in retroactive interference, we forget the old stuff or the first stuff we learned. In proactive interference, we forget the new stuff or the second stuff that we learned. And the old stuff stays around in proactive interference. We just can't seem to learn the new thing. The new stuff remains, and we can't remember the old in retroactive interference. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple more examples just from my own life, and you try to say which one it is. So when I was little, my parents spoke Italian. My first language is Italian. I've spoke Italian my whole life. And in college, I tried to learn Spanish. It was really hard to learn Spanish because I would find myself just saying Italian things when I was supposed to be saying Spanish things. So I kept saying all my Italian words. When I was supposed to say como estás, I'd still say como stai. So I just had trouble learning Spanish. What kind of interference was I experiencing? If you said proactive interference, you're right, because I couldn't learn the new thing, Spanish, because the old stuff was getting in the way. Okay, I'm going to give you another one. Like I said, I spoke Italian as a kid, but I will say I probably spoke more Italian words at age 3 than I do now, because having to speak English most of the day had really changed how comfortable and confident I felt speaking Italian and how many words that I used frequently. So I seem to have forgot some of the Italian that I learned as a very young child. Which kind of interference? If you said retroactive interference, you're right, because I kind of forgot some of the older material, since then I had to learn English after learning Italian. All right, let me try 2 more. So sometimes I have students and I have their older brothers or sisters in class, and I accidentally will call the student their older brother or sister's name. What kind of interference is that? So if you think about it, I have this kid in my class right now, but I keep calling them by a name that I had maybe 5 or 6 years ago. What kind of interference? If you said proactive, you're right, because I can't remember this new kid's name and I keep saying the old one. And I'm having trouble with the newer sibling, the younger sibling. Okay, last one. Kids will come and visit me sometimes, and I remember who they are, but I don't always remember what college they went to or what their major is, because I meet a lot of kids and I have to memorize a lot of colleges where they're going and a lot of majors. So what kind of interference is that? When old students visit me, I forget what school they went to or what their major was going to be. If you said retroactive interference, you're right, because I'm forgetting old. I have many students all day. Okay, this was pretty tricky. We played a Kahoot, and we did some problems that are in the handout if you have it. If not, you can practice in the Quizlet.